Well, we have a wonderful panel set up here. Some of these lovely people you were able to hear from earlier today. But if you're just joining us, let me share who these fine folks are, and then we're going to give them a couple minutes to share a little bit about the work that they do. And then we're going to go into some questions, some prompts, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And just as a reminder, this panel is around the role of on-site biochar for recovery, mitigation, and adaptation. Okay, so with that, we have Darren McAvoy, we have Dipita Ghosh, we have Todd, Rexine, and Alexis Kuypers. Close? Okay. I practiced, but I don't think I practiced enough. Let's get going. I think, Alexis, you're first. Do you want to come on up?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Lexi with Airburners, and this lovely map shows that we've been around for actually 28 years, and these dots are machines around the world. They're on military bases. We are in South Florida, though. So, the Char Bus was created under a cooperative research and development agreement with the US Forest Service. Now, our machines, they existed to eliminate wood waste, but it was US Forest that said to us, you're making biochar and we need it. So together we've created the Char Bus. I just said all this. But we are the lowest cost, least environmental impact. We're often considered the best available control technology, the BACT. So this shows how the air curtain works. Basically, it is an open box. The air curtain will contain the particulate matter. The way it works, you fill it up about 30%. You take a little bit of diesel, pour that on, and then take a torch to ignite. Once you ignite, if you turn on the machine, you will blow the fire out. You got to give it a good 5 minutes, let it get nice and hot, and then you can turn on the machine. Now, either run by a diesel engine or an electric motor, you're turning on a fan. The fan is going to control the manifold. Once the machine is fully up to speed and running, the air coming out of the manifold creates an air lid over the top of the firebox. This lid traps the particles of smoke underneath the air curtain for fractions of a second, causing them to reburn, and that secondary burn is what reduces the smoke particle size so small that when it's finally released, it looks like heat waves coming out. It does not look like smoke. The whole purpose of that air curtain is to create the secondary burn. The extra air helps oxygenate the fire to burn as fast as possible. The result is a 40 times faster burn than open burning. Now, our machines have been tested by air quality agencies all around the world, including, of course, EPA. We had a cooperative research and development agreement with EPA as well. Now, the biocharger takes it to the next level. They take our bigger firebox than the Char Bus. It is a 223 firebox, and with that you've got 2 or 3 other modules. Either you're on-grid or off-grid, but with this one, the biocharger, you're off-grid. The power module is an ORC made by Electrotherm. I know they're here today too. That is going to make about 100 kilowatts with a 30 kilowatt parasitic loss, so you're at 70 net. So with this system, we would like to upgrade it into a bigger Char Bus too. So then we can make carbon credits and electricity, and that's where we're going. Here's my contact information, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Alexis. And I think last time at the one in Sacramento, was there a full-size one on display?
We brought the Char Bus to the Sacramento show.
It was crazy. It was cool because you could just go up and take a look at it. And now let's hand it over to Darren, who's also been doing more cool stuff.
Thank you, Korina. I'm Darren McAvoy. I'm an extension forestry professor from Utah State University. I'm honored to be here today to talk about big box biochar kilns. We started off with a Utah Public Lands Initiative grant in 2019 that allowed us to build these. The first one here is 16 foot long, weighed 3,000 pounds. It was too big for a lot of our contractors. So I scaled it down. I call this one the BB12 because it's 12 foot long. It's 6 foot wide and 4 foot high. It weighs about 2,000 pounds, so it can be managed with a small excavator, a Mini X, and a F-150, or even I can tow it with my Tacoma. I wanted to scale it so that anybody who works in the woods who has this typical equipment can use this sort of thing. It's a double wall technology, which allows the operators to escape from the heat a little bit, and it improves heat distribution within the kiln and results in much higher char quality. Typically, our chars are coming out around 85% pure carbon with H to C ratio around 0.3 or 0.4. One of the things I ask is that I call this an open source. I'll share with you my website with plans, and people all over the world have built these, mostly in the US, about a dozen around the US and a few in other countries. And I just ask for knowledge exchange. I ask that you tell me what you do so that I can share that with other people and we can continue to expand this approach. It is practical for processing invasive species and expanding species. Here we're processing Russian olive on the Bear River at the Bear River Massacre Site, Shoshone tribal land. We do a lot of tamarisk and Utah juniper as well. These are our construction plans. This is operating on that Shoshone land. And these are the places they've been adopted. This particular photo is from Indonesia, the furthest one away. This one is in Jakarta. Thank you.
Great, and then we've got just a slide or two from our remaining two panelists, and I think we've got, yes. Todd, you're up.
I'm Todd Rexine. I'm a conservation director with Great River Greening, and we're a nonprofit in the state of Minnesota, and we look at land restoration. We work on land restoration across the state on public lands, focusing on conservation practices and how to restore land back to more of a natural state. Typically, these lands that we're working on we're coming in at the front end of the restoration, so we're kind of doing the heavy lifts. We're working with DNR, Fish and Wildlife Service. We're working with our local city and government agencies on their public lands. And we're coming in to access dollars to do the heavy lifting on the first end of the restoration. And that means clearing out usually invasive shrubs, trees, or tree thinning on properties that have just been let go and not had any conservation work on them. And through that process, we've came to the realization we need to do something with all the wood waste that's coming off the lands. There was biofuel plants in the state that used to process this waste for energy. Those biofuel plants started shutting down in 2017 due to solar and wind being more economical. And we started to end up with a lot of wood waste in the landscape again. And our contractors that we hired went back to pile burning everything. And as a conservation organization, we started questioning, is this the right thing to be doing on the landscape? We're ending up with large burn scars, all the carbon's going up into the atmosphere, and we came up with a thought about a different way to go about doing it, and basically we came to biochar on site as a solution for this. We have contractors out there that we figure this is easily trainable for our service providers. They already have a lot of the equipment to manage fire, and this is low tech for them that they could use this type of equipment on sites as well. So we're out there we're conducting statewide demos and trainings across the state and presentations to bring people, citizens and members of the natural resource community in Minnesota up to speed on what biochar is and how biochar processing can be used on natural resource sites. We're looking at how do we get kilns out into people's hands, so whether it's a local governmental unit or private landowners or agricultural producers. We now have 7 Oregons, 7 Ring of Fires, and we will have 3 big box, hopefully by November, that we can start getting renting out to people. And then how do we offset some of those rental costs and transportation costs when we're in St. Paul and we have the whole rest of the state to work with. And then also start having focused discussions on renewable ag side of stuff with farmers that are looking for silvopasture, grazing in forest lands, and what do they do with all that material. And then how do we start looking at neighboring states, and how do we start providing access and roads into neighboring states to expand biochar on site.
Thanks, Todd. And for anybody who has come in and didn't get to see Dipita's presentation, do you want to just give us a little peek into what you've been doing?
Hi everyone, I'm Dipita Ghosh and I work on applying biochar in the soil for restoration purposes. The soil could be degraded, arid, have heavy metal contamination, or might be a mining soil. We try to restore soil by adding biochar. Yeah, if you have any question regarding that, shoot.
Wonderful. So you've met all of our panelists. And so the conversation we're hoping to have today is really looking into and exploring these topics, starting with mitigation. What are the things that biochar production and application, what can that do to help, head things off at the pass? And so let's start with that at the beginning of the cycle. Who would like to dive in and talk about some of the hazards that biochar production is helping address, whether it's, fuel loads or invasive species? I know it came up in a couple of these presentations today.
Well, certainly fuel loads. I was a firefighter for 20 years. I was in a hotshot crew in Montana and dealt with large project fires all around the country, and it's chipping away at a very big beast. It's a very small teaspoon trying to empty a large lake, but we have to start somewhere, and by scaling this out, not so much as up, and having lots of these kilns in every farm and ranch, and every logger having a complement of them, just like they've got all their other equipment, I think will be a good step towards reducing hazardous fuels on a large scale. While I'm at it, I want to say one more thing about that. Dipita's boss nowadays and former advisor, Hansu Pan, and I did a little back of the cocktail napkin sort of calculation a few years ago. We happened to be working in Brazil, and there they have these mud hut kilns that are similar to our beehive-shaped kilns we have all around Utah, historic charcoal kilns. And these mud hut kilns are perhaps similar in size to the big box kilns. And they're spread out all over the country of Brazil. And together we calculated the amount of wood that they put in these kilns every year. That's for cooking and for steel production and other things, but we're still talking about the same process. If you add up all of that wood that they put in there in 1 year, that's the same amount of wood that exists as what we call hazardous fuels, wood that we want to get rid of, in all of California and all of Arizona. In 1 year, we could process that amount of wood in these kilns if we scale them out enough.
Yeah, I would like to add. To add to that, invasive weeds, in mining restoration, if you have ever been to a mining area, it's like a hot spot for invasive weeds. When you are trying to restore trees or, grow trees and restore the areas, invasive weeds play a big role, and they are like competition for the plants that you're trying to grow. So, you can actually use those invasive weeds to produce biochar and restore the soil. That was my PhD thesis. So, yeah, invasive weeds.
I just want to add that we could have these bigger machines at a centralized location, maybe. I was thinking about one of your slides, actually, and it was the one where you said it was 19 elephants worth of material that you got rid of. We could literally get rid of that in a 330 in 1 day. So we can get rid of this material, we can turn it into biochar, and it's just a matter of having these machines in the right places to do so.
I want to just follow up with Dipita's comment on invasive weeds, and earlier we talked about buckbrush Todd talked about buckbrush, and the same story, perhaps our most difficult invasive weed in the West, could be argued, in the Southwest is cheatgrass. And with both of those cases, most invasives like that, let me get this right, they need less nitrogen than the natives typically do. So we add raw biochar to our soils, and it will sort of rob the soils of nitrogen as it's sort of charging itself, and that gives the natives a chance to get ahead.
Yeah, and I think from the fire standpoint, again, so we're dealing with an invasive species. We have that problem. We have all this brush, but then on top of it, there's all this other stuff attacking our native trees across this country and across the world, because everything keeps moving. We keep moving stuff around, and by having the biochar on site, whatever size machine it is, we can start to treat some of those invasive species at the site, because we have all the urban trees that also have to come down, and we can't continue to plug more stuff into the system. So by having mobilized systems, whatever they are, or centralized systems, we can start to deal with some of that wood waste where it's at, and not continue to produce a pile-up effect. I know in Minnesota alone, there's there's a site up north of the cities here. They're sitting on 2 million cubic yards of just ash tree removal. It's an arborist community. They are removing trees that are dying, but now those trees are just sitting there. They don't have anything to do with them, and that continues to be the problem.
No, thank you. I mean, so many different challenges. So then, for those communities where, you've been able to, you guys have been doing this in all these different types of communities, been able to turn what was, this hazard, right, into something that's valuable. How has that changed things for those areas, and what's been the effect? Maybe starting with, who are some of the community partners that you've been working with?
I can take it. Our effect, I think, part of the way we set our initiative up is that we were going to become the experts on it and then start training others. And what we found out is that we're getting governmental units reaching out to us saying, I want to try the kiln. I think and we're coming from natural resources aspect. They need something they can throw in the back of a truck, that they can just have a small crew go out and burn. And they have piles sitting in the landscape, and they're like, well, we don't really want to put the money into it. Can we try one of your kilns? And we've had multiple entities that have just started trying the kilns, and that's why we got the kilns, is so people can try them. And then they start to buy in on it, and then they can start to ramp up. So they say, well, okay, I got the Ring of Fire, now I can start looking at the big box, and they start to get comfortable with processing wood waste in a different manner. And that's where we've seen multiple different entities within the Twin City metropolitan region go that route. And we've also seen, as well as on the other end, is that we're working with ag producers on our other side of our organization, and they're starting to show interest they don't want to pile burn anymore in the landscape. They know it's bad, but they don't know what else to do. So now we are working with them as well as how do we get kilns out there so that farmers can start to do it and start to work differently. Once you know how to do it, all the kilns operate pretty much the same manner.
We work with US Forest Service, of course, so they've got lots of our machines, and absolutely they've been leaving the material behind, and it's been very valuable for US Forest Service, but beyond that, tribes, they've been one of our biggest proponents because they want to prescribe burn without the smoke. So I would say municipalities as well.
Yeah, to add to both of them, actually, like she said, they often leave the biochar there for communities to use. But because I'm the only biochar researcher up there in northern Arizona, I kind of grabbed all the biochar, and I'm applying the biochar in conjunction with other growers who are interested, and we are also sometimes partnering with the tribal members to help us with these plantation in fire scars area. So yeah, it impacts a lot, and we are also helping the county people with the plantation activity by biochar application. So like a lot of collaboration happening there.
And it sounds like a lot of these are sort of, earlier days, getting the word out. Have any of these evolved into like more regular programs or, things that seem like they're going to really, no pun intended, take root?
Well, my favorite example for the big box kilns might be Todd's project. They have 3 big box kilns, and they're modifying them, and I think that's great. I work with farmers kind of all over the country, and they all tend to modify them in various ways, put on roll-off dumpster wheels and indoors, and I pretty much just ask that you share that information so I can share it back with others. But I tend to work mostly with agencies at home. It was the Bureau of Land Management and the USDA Forest Service that asked me to try to develop this sort of technology. But I work with the NRCS and private farmers all over Utah and other folks in other countries like Texas, other states like Texas that are just looking for ways to reduce wood waste inexpensively.
Universities are purchasing, and they're starting some amazing programs with people like Dipita that are really showing us what this material can do. As the manufacturer, we're not applying it, but it's really neat to hear about it.
Wonderful. Well, let's shift to a related topic around fire. Fire's come up a lot from on the mitigation side, but let's shift to what happens after the fire, which Dipita, I know you've spent some time on. I'd love to hear from anybody here who's had some of that experience in that post-fire recovery process and the role that biochar production and application have in that context.
Well, burned wood often has no value at the sawmill. It depends. If you're in a big sawing community and you can find a sawmill that is willing to take a large run of burned wood, they might do that, but it turns their white wood black in the process, and they really lose a lot of value. They might run a whole batch of burned wood through, but they're not going to mix one load of burned wood with the next load of green wood. So trying to get rid of burnt wood is a big challenge, and so if we can make biochar out of it, and we absolutely can, we have many times, and then in some cases, some businesses are evolving to help those landowners get the carbon credits for that material and use that cash to do the restoration, to cut the trees, to plant new trees.
Like I talked about in my presentation, we actually use the dead snags for biochar production, and now we are applying it to see how useful it can be with soil restoration and stuff like that. So yeah, it can be really used post-recovery for such wonderful purpose.
And can you expand a little bit on, I recall in your presentation, you sort of showed the biochar being applied to different types of tree plantings. Mm-hmm. How did it, can you tell us just a little bit more about like how did it do, and then how did the land managers respond to that? So I think it's a nice little story.
So it's like we planted in 2 areas. One was the pipeline fire and another was the shells fire. The shells fire, and both were like devastating fire. Like this one that I showed you, that was the pipeline fire, and we applied it in a private land, and we planted like 200 saplings of trees. Unfortunately, only 5 survived, but all of them were on biochar. So, I mean, you can't call it a failure, you can't call it a success, but what I noticed out of studying the soil is that, the soil properties improved a lot, which means you need to leave the biochar on site, let the soil and biochar play, let it stabilize, and then do the plantation. That was a very big lesson that I learned out of the plantation activity there.
Yeah, that's really valuable information. Thank you. Any other post-fire recovery examples from the panel? Okay, but other types of, we've seen more disasters happening like hurricanes, et cetera. It seems like, didn't the big box kiln get deployed in some disaster recovery?
Yeah, I heard so.
And I think the char boss has quite a bit.
Do
Do you want to do that one then?
I mean, it's often, again, the best available control technology, so that's why they're gonna bring in fireboxes. Either the state will own them, DOT owns them, hopefully you can just bring them in, you know? Otherwise, we'll make them for you tomorrow.
So question for that, just to follow up. So, they've brought in for this, disaster recovery situation. And so this is potentially into communities that haven't had a chance to see this technology in play. Have you seen, follow-on effects in those communities where you've brought it in for the disaster?
Absolutely. After it's been used, we get phone calls of contractors wanting to implement the machines because it does make such a difference on their bottom line.
Did you have similar examples? Okay. Yeah, no, part of the reason I wanted to dig into that a little bit is that somebody was asking in one of the earlier Q&As around, starting up a business and, how do you get customers? And, it just really seems to follow that if you can find a way in where a community is in need for something, right? It's a great way to show a new pathway and a new approach to things. It's terrible that it's, basically on the hills of a disaster, but, sometimes those are opportunities for people to change methodologies. So let's move to longer term cycles. I think, let's see here. So one of the questions I had for the panel was around, we've got a lot of examples where somebody will do an implementation once, and oh wow, that was cool, and then they might not do it again, right? And so I'm looking for examples or thoughts on how to embed this into something that is more of a recurring practice that's established.
The oldest biochar application study is like just 12 years old. So you're looking at a very new science. So, I hardly think there are studies. I mean, I'm pretty sure there are. But, what I noticed even in the last Biochar conference was that there were all these wonderful companies that are producing biochar talking about their properties. But when you ask them, did you apply it somewhere? Did it actually help with, what you're claiming? Most companies didn't have any idea. So I think that that's an area which needs a lot of focus, where you need to apply somewhere, like soil restoration or wastewater restoration, whatever. Because we don't have studies. Like even when I'm designing my studies, because Arizona doesn't have any reported studies on biochar. So like my study is like 2 years old. So nothing of that sort for me.
Mm-hmm.
I can say that the last time I did produce biochar out in the field was at the beginning of summer. It was in June. It was with an 83-year-old man who's been producing biochar on his property up in Coal Creek in Utah for about almost 10 years now, using Oregon kilns, and he keeps coming back doing it again and again, partly because he's passionate about the land management. He's really interested in that, but it's also really helpful that he's getting the NRCS credits for that.
Yeah, and I think on our side, from the conservation standpoint, a lot of our service providers, the reason they're in doing conservation, natural resource management, is they really believe in doing what's best for the landscape. So trying to get the adoption of this new technology, which is old, but it's new now for us. But what we've been trying to do over the last 2 to 3 years is part of train ourselves and train. But we're natural resource professionals as well, and we understand how specifications work and how can standardized specifications, if you hire a contractor to do the job, they can follow the same specifications and they know what you expect from them. Now, getting them to adopt it is going to take some time because they're not sure how to bid on those specifications. So being flexible on how you hire a contractor to implement biochar on-site kilns, you just have to be flexible. You say, like some of you have heard this already, but we're starting to the point where here's our specs, please bid on them, or understand what they are, and we're going to hire you. What does it cost for 2 days? What's it cost for 3 days? And let's see how much you can get done. And they're actually, most of the time, they're surprised at how much they actually can get done in 2 to 3 days. Those, they're used to lighting 20 piles at one time, but that's a lot of manpower to light 20 piles and sit out there versus when you can sit there and light 1 kiln or 2 kilns and it takes 3 people. And then yeah, they're busy. They're going to be moving brush all day, but they can process a lot of material. So I think that's part of the adoption process too, is how do we get standard specifications for entities that are going to implement on our behalfs on sites in restoration.
Yeah, we've seen that come up where people, to your point, aren't sure how to bid it because they haven't really done it at scale before. And so just giving them the opportunity to do it for a couple of days and go like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I know how to bid it. Yeah, no, that's great. Let's see here. So let's see here. What are some of the more innovative uses that you guys have seen for biochar production or, and application for any of the topics that we've been covering here today, like mitigation, adaptation, resilience, et cetera? What's been sort of like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that?
Biochar for cosmetic industries. Yeah, they are making face masks because charcoal masks are in, so now biochar masks. So yeah, that's, I think, a very new and innovative area of, application.
I don't think I'd call it innovative, but it's a little bit unusual. I've had to do, or I've gotten to do biochar in pits in several places, and frankly, I hate it. I find it really dangerous. People can fall into pits, equipment can fall into pits. I've had some wicked close calls that way. But I've done it in pits with air curtain burners, trench burners they're called, 30-foot, 40-foot long pits, 10-foot diameter, or 10-foot wide, about 8-foot deep. And I've also done it in really shallow pits, teaching workshops in Alaska and small villages and really remote places where we couldn't fit a ring of fire kiln into the Cessna that was flying me in there. And in other communities like Soldotna, they just didn't want to have to buy another piece of equipment. So we dug a shallow pit. But any pit size I try to avoid because they're dangerous.
An interesting use I've heard of, the US Forest Service, they're taking the biochar, they're putting it into sacks, and then they're using it for runoff. So water, to clean the water. So I've heard of a lot of that.
Did a little research with a colleague a few years ago on making large tea bags with it and putting it into the ponds and golf courses to absorb the excess nutrients there. And that, in fact, charges the char. It adds value to the char, so you can replace it every once in a while that way.
Electrode production by biochar, that's something new too.
Say it again.
Electrode, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's see here. We're getting close to running out of questions that from me, but we have a whole audience here, and we have people who are specializing in mitigation, adaptation, and all of these amazing uses. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to line up behind that microphone there, and we would love to take your questions. Let's see here. So there's a bunch of different, there's both invasive species, we've talked about that a little bit, but they come in many different forms. And so, sometimes they're like really brushy things that are, you talked about that, Todd, but they take a bunch of other forms. Can you maybe talk about some of the different invasive species you've been dealing with? And, this goes to the whole panel, but let's start with Todd.
It's a lot.
Well, and especially how what are the differences in dealing with one invasive species versus another?
Yeah, so the various invasive, I'll keep it on the brush and woody side of it. But a lot of them, they're all different. It's not just one remedy fits all for invasive species removal. Some are trees, and then it's also how do you treat them or get them out of the situations. Others have thorns on them, and it's adapting to how you need to do them. And then we're also dealing with trees too. Like there's invasive trees, which now you get into a whole nother box. The shrubs are one thing, and it's when you start to get to the trees, and how do you get those trees cut safely and not damage the rest of the landscape? And how do you treat those root systems so that they're not re-sprouting and starting to bring more? You want to kill it. Unfortunately, that's what we're there to do. Is we need to kill the invasive species. And then how do you transport those out safely so that when you get them staged in a spot, you have material that can dry and use in the kilns in a safe environment?
In our machines, it doesn't really matter if you're dealing with bugs, if you're dealing with the tree, if you're dealing with the shrub. I guess it doesn't really burn the grass as well. Yeah. It wouldn't burn grass as well.
I'd say the same thing about a big box kiln. Doesn't do grass or anything that's going to mat very well, but any log, stick sort of thing works great. As mentioned, I've done a lot of Russian olive. That is a very thorny tree species that grows 30 feet high and across the river bottoms of the West. It has expanded by, I don't know, it seems like 10 times in the last 10 years. I don't think there are any numbers on that, but that is anecdotal. And it really changes the ecology of river bottoms. I've spent a lot of time on the Green River, the Colorado River, the White River, all the rivers that flow through Utah. And these trees form a bank that disallows the river from creating new pathways in big flood years. So it's sort of stuck in the same place. And that's really affecting how the cottonwood galleries grow. Those are big stands of cottonwood trees that are critical to wildlife habitat, beavers and all sorts of other critters down in those river bottoms. And because the Russian olives are holding the banks in place, you can look across those stands and see that there's no young trees coming in. So it's a big problem in the West.
Too bad the beaver don't like the cottonwood, or the Russian olive, sorry.
Like I already talked about invasive species. So lantana, as you know here, it's an ornamental plant. But somebody thought it would be cool to take lantana to India and plant them, and they just bursted. It's like crazy invasive in India. So I kind of used that to produce biochar, and I produced it in a very controlled environment, and it's a woody shrub there. So like it was just easier to, convert it into biochar. Yeah.
The reason big box kilns are existing in Ireland is because of rhododendron. In lots of parts of the United States, rhododendron, East Coast, is very highly valued and as a wild species up on mountaintops, like along the Appalachian Trail. But in Ireland, it just takes over farm fields and stuff. So they're motivated to get rid of it, and that's what they use.
It's so cool how one thing is, just converts to a totally different issue depending on where we are. Well, we have some people with questions. This is wonderful. Please ask away.
My question is about the, I guess the rules, the legislative landscape in the U.S. Some states allow it, other states don't. This is probably a theme that's come up many times in this room. Just would love to hear just some views on. I guess like where do we stand, and how is that going? Like maybe some stories from your experience where maybe you're in a state or a region where it's not allowed. Are we ready to just like make it allowed in every state if we can just get the right groups of people organized in the right areas?
Well, one of the issues around that, Matthew, is the smoke, the air quality issue, and with research showing that how little smoke comes out of a flame cap kiln when properly operated, I think is a big step. And that's been done for the Ring of Fire, but it needs to be done for other low-tech technologies, I think, and that will help.
I believe that, like I said, that the oldest biochar application study is like just 12 years, convincing growers, like farmers, to actually, replace biochar with maybe fertilizers and stuff like that. that's a big challenge that we are facing when we are, trying to convince people to actually apply biochar in their fields.
So I don't know if there's rules against applying biochar. I know there's rules against
producing.
producing. Okay, good. So the rules are getting easier. That's the good news, at least on Airburners. So Title V has been dropped on air curtain burners, and that's federally, but now every state still gets to say their piece. So depending on where the location is, it's just fire marshal approval that's needed when we're moving this thing around all the time. If it's not going to be at a stationary location for 6+ months, we're allowed to go with fire marshal approval in a lot of cases.
That's promising.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I think most of it's outreach to fire officials. They're the ones ultimately permitting, whether it's at the state level or even at the municipal level. And sometimes you got both of them. One wants the other one, and they both want both. But I think that's some of that implementation is getting the fire folks on board and explaining to them and getting them out to demonstrations to see these various systems in place and that what the fire risk is, so they can assess for themselves and feel comfortable signing off on those permits.
Yeah, and we've had, I know in Washington, the bigger challenges have been less with the fire folks, but more with the air folks. That's been the sticky wicket.
I think when you're doing these workshops, it's for me, I have a background in fire, so it's natural to involve firefighters, but they have the water, they have the tools, they have the staffing. So it just makes a ton of sense for me. It makes my job so much easier to invite them to my workshops and partner with them.
Yeah, fantastic allies. We got another question. I love it.
Don Harfield with Char Terra and Find Energy in Canada. And so, Darren, this question is for you. I understand that you've been involved in some tribal projects, and we're working with a First Nation in northern Alberta. So I'd be very interested to find out how your relationships with doing these tribal projects. And I would like to catch you after the discussion here, but if you could make a few comments now, I would appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think the bottom line, whether you're dealing with tribes or anybody, and this has been a recurring theme, maybe we haven't used these words, but it's baby steps. Maybe starting with an Oregon kiln or even a 3-foot Weber grill, as was suggested this morning. It's a great little biochar kiln. And in fact, my work, I'm sort of leaning back towards that smaller and smaller scale, much to my surprise. There's not a lot of loggers in Utah. There's no timber industry, and that's the audience I am commanded to serve as a USU employee. So backyard scale. I shopped Amazon recently and purchased a barbecue grill, a fire pit. And in most states, if your fire is less than 3 foot in diameter, you don't have to deal with smoke management or with fire management. It's just a barbecue. And so starting really small, teaching them how to do that, and then scaling up from there.
Thank you very much, Darren. Now, because we're actually talking about a 3 megawatt electrical production and 5,000 tons of biochar a year. So baby steps, I'm listening loudly to you. Thank you.
Lots of big box kilns spread out all over. Let's talk later. I'd be happy to come visit.
And just one quick follow-up on that. A couple folks that I've been talking to who are working with tribes, they actually have been starting from the remediation angle. So starting with, they have either a wetland remediation project, and so they're starting with the end use in mind, and then purchasing biochar and applying it, seeing how that goes, and then going, and then starting to, the pathway there is to go from, hey, does this work from a remediation and soil health perspective? Okay, now how can we self-service by creating our own biochar instead of buying it? So that's another way in.
And that's what led to that Shoshone tribal project that I mentioned earlier. They had purchased this property. It had historic and tribal and sacred importance to them. And it had been taken over by this invasive species, mostly Russian olive. They did all the ethnobotany, asking the grandmothers what plants were out there, and they need to replace all those plants. First, they had to get rid of all the material that was on site that was invasive, and they wanted a way to ensure that those natives that they were going to replant were going to survive. So CHAR answers several of those questions.
All right.
You're up.
First, thanks for sharing your wisdom on the panel, all of you. My question is about biochar application and for post-wildfire remediation. If we think about a farmer using biochar, the farmer's going to incorporate it into his or her land, and that seems like it'll distribute it into the soil effectively. When we're dealing with a forest, maybe a national forest, there's hills, there's lots of debris that might still be on the landscape, and it's not the case that you're going to be tilling the national forest. So my question is, are there any best practices when you are just going to return biochar to the forest land so that it's most beneficial, not just going to whatever it would do if it just sat there? So.
Well, the first best practice is to make sure it's all cool to the touch. We don't start any more fires.
There, yeah.
But the fact is, the way forest operations occur, logs get drugged to a central landing area. And that's where the biggest impact is. And that's where your kilns are going to go, whatever kind of kiln or air burner we're talking about. And we tend to have pieces of machinery on the landing to load the logs and that sort of thing. So we just use that same machinery just to crudely spread it out. I could show you videos of excavators just whipping it out into the forest. And it's all top applied, and that's absolutely fine. It's going to work itself down into the soil with percolation, with gravity, with animal movement, and it does a lot of good just sitting on the top anyway.
To add to that, like you said, we can't, till the forest surface and stuff like that. So have you ever seen how plantation is done in forest? Like, it's like, they just, pull the soil out with a tool and just put the rooted sapling. So what we did in our study was we added biochar in that hole itself, so that we don't disturb the soil. And like he said, like it can just, you can just, spread the biochar too, and, let it percolate. So that's the best practice right now that we know. But yeah, I think, as we progress with our research, we would know which is the best actually.
One follow-up. For wildfire that's produced hydrophobic soil, is there anything in particular you would do there, or you're going to broadcast it and let it eventually get in there? Yeah.
Go.
That's the best I know of.
Okay. Thank you.
One thing I've heard of some other folks doing is doing a combination of chips and biochar. And that just changes the combination of stuff that's there. And because you've got more water holding capacity, especially if you're in a drier environment, it's more likely that the chips are going to degrade. So what that lets you do is to take two debris removal approaches at the same time and combine them. So that might be another way, especially if you're dealing with slopes where runoff is an issue and you want to create a rougher soil surface.
Or maybe adding compost to it or manure. Yeah, I mean,
That's
it's
gonna be the
difficult in
challenge at scale.
forest, yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, I had a very similar question, and maybe we can build on the last question. I know, Dipita, you had talked about seeing biochar sort of slow down development when you initially introduced it. Was that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what prompted my question. I'm Tom Fahey. I'm a local master naturalist, and I've been doing lots of buckthorn removal, and we got loads of piles of it to get rid of on federal and city lands. And I've been doing prairie restoration and oak savanna restoration, hoping to get biochar going, especially on the federal lands right on the Minnesota River Valley, is there any reason why we'd want to wait to incorporate the biochar into River Valley flatland? And maybe first you, Dipita, and then maybe Todd, you can comment on your experience here locally too.
So there are two reasons actually. There's an effect called the priming effect. When you apply biochar in the soil, you're kind of stopping the nitrogen to, you're not letting the plant take in nitrogen for its growth. So that's the biggest problem. It's a negative priming effect that comes into play and doesn't make the nutrients available to the plants. So what I believe is, leaving the biochar in the soil, let it, the negative effect of priming reduced, and then, and also the microbial activities play earlier on when you're applying the biochar. So like it's a more fertile soil, maybe in like 6 months or a year. So that's what I believe would help, rather than just planting with the application of biochar.
Okay, and so on that, maybe I can go next to you, Todd, too, on in prairie restoration, again, I'm still learning, but maybe enough to be dangerous, but learning that the prairie plants really do best without a lot of nitrogen, and that it's the invasives with a lot of nitrogen that really move in and compete. So I don't know, Todd, have you had any experience locally with biochar application and timing versus planting native seed?
Yeah, we haven't planted yet into biochar. We have spread it on sites, but because of the effects of biochar, I always think of biochar as it's a sponge. We're throwing a bunch of sponges out there, and nature wants to be at equilibrium. And so my concern always about seeding right away or doing anything after biochar is applied is I want it to settle down in the soil and make sure that we're at equilibrium in the soil. If that means that it needs to pull more nutrients out of the soil, which fortunately, if you're doing it in a prairie, prairies don't like high nutrient soils.
Right.
That's a good thing. That means it probably is priming your soil too at the same time as it's priming itself. And I think that's why some of our prairie restorations, at least in the state, have problems, is because they're usually on old ag lands that are high nutrient soils.
Right.
So, using biochar, put it on the site, and I would say the same thing. Let it sit for a year. That way it's at equilibrium with the soils.
Okay, thank you.
So if I'm just going to jump in and ask a related question to this. Sorry, I'm skipping the line here. And that is that, one of the things we've talked about, different application styles, right? Some where you're just putting it on top, somewhere it's getting tilled in, somewhere it's getting mixed with something like compost, et cetera, et cetera. And those all have very, very different outcomes. And so, but it sounds like across all of those, time is your friend. Is that kind of what we're hearing here? Or, please feel free to disagree. That's what we're here for.
Time is your friend up to the end of the grant cycle.
True words. All right, John, what do you got for us?
Speaking of grant cycles and funding opportunities, there's a program inside of EQIP called the Conservation Practice Standard Code 384, which has to do with the conversion of woody biomass into biochar for landowners. Have any of you worked with that?
I think I'm working with landowners in Utah and Montana and Washington on those practices, yes.
What does it provide them?
Cash.
Cash. So cash to build the kilns and apply the biochar, or
Yes.
to get training?
No, cash to build to process the wood, to get rid of, there was a farmer on the Yellowstone River near Miles City, Montana, and he is receiving those funds to get rid of Russian olive and excessive amounts of cottonwood along the Yellowstone River.
Okay. Todd, have you worked with anybody on that?
We have not in Minnesota, primarily because application biochar in ag lands is still not covered by, is not endorsed by the NRCS in Minnesota at this point. Primarily because they're still doing studies on it. The concern from the soil scientists in the state, from my understanding, is what is the herbicide residency in biochar, and is there any? So there are entities that are doing testing with NRCS in the state to hopefully move that standard forward. I know neighboring states have all adopted those standards, but I think Minnesota's got some time to go yet.
And Florida, they're already offering it. Last year, it was hundreds of dollars per acre for putting the biochar on the property. And as far as I understand, that's what it is this year as well. So it's not quite for getting rid of the invasives, but it should be. It's for putting the biochar on the property.
I want to keep asking questions if I can. Who has experience working? Pallet waste wood is turning into a huge problem. Who has experience with that? Okay, who wants to go first? Two.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've burned pallets in a few places. Most recently in Petersburg, Alaska. I had the good fortune of spending last summer teaching biochar workshops on a USDA Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education grant in Alaska, all over the state, working with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And in Petersburg in the southeast, it's a small community where they're separated from everything. Everything needs to be brought in, everything they eat and consume, and it all comes in on pallets. And those pallets just stack up, and they usually just burn the stack when they're ready. And then and so we took some of those pallets out of the landfill and made a big pile of biochar for Farragut Farms, a local farm. And we just ran a really strong wheeled magnet through the material afterwards and picked out a big pail full of nails. And yeah, but we characterized the biochar. It's reasonably high quality.
Nice, waste to value.
Yeah.
In our machines, Charboss will not take the pallets. The problem is going to be all the moving parts of the Charboss. So if I throw nails in there, there's no magnet to take it out. So we have customers that have 200 series or 300 series boxes, and they'll eliminate pallets. In a 327, in 1 hour, you can get rid of 225 pallets. At the end of the day, you're just going to use a big magnet and recycle all that metal. And I would say, though, a lot of the material that you're going to have at the bottom of a firebox is going to be ash, though, because the material is already kiln dried.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of potential for biochar, I would suspect. I mean, I guess some, but not as much with green.
Well, with our processes, we quench the material at the end, which washes all that ash away. It tends to be very low ash content, 4 to 7% typically.
Oh, okay. So potentially, if you did it in a system like a firebox, you could just stop it earlier.
No, that's one of the challenges of working with the fireboxes.
Yeah.
The ceramic.
Well, we're not going to quench in there.
You can't quench in it. It'll
No
crack.
quenching.
It'll crack. And the other challenge is you can't put, really fouled feedstock. I've gotten to work with the Charboss at a landfill in Utah. Matthew was at, and we both got to watch the horror of the operators, poor Deb and Jim, when we put in, unknowingly put in barbed wire and all kinds of fouled material. The moving parts don't take to that too well.
One thing I remember I had a question, I think, for Kelpie at one point, because I was asking about pallets as well, because there was a concern about having that much metal during the burn process and what that would do. Would it, leach into the biochar? And I think she had done a load and she went and gotten it tested afterwards, and that was an absolute non-issue, much to my delight, that the metal stayed on the nails and the staples.
I agree. Yeah, we did a full characterization and saw nothing outstanding there.
So that's really good news. I'd like to invite our panelists to any closing thoughts on this topic, and
With whatever technology you choose, make more char.
And apply it in soil.
I'm a real newbie, so even the stupid questions probably have answers. I have not heard anything about once or the second or the third best inoculation to charge up charcoal.
Sorry, it's highly configurable.
So this is this is a really fantastic book called The Biochar Handbook.
Yeah.
You have it?
I think the first question is what's available to you? Do you have do you have composted steer manure? Do you have some sort of compost system you can work with? What's the cheap and free and easy nutrients?
Well, around Traverse City, Michigan, there's not a lot of manure, but definitely up on McAvoy.
So how about are there local composting operations from all those farms?
We're starting up a big program.
That-
So would manure be the number one most efficient or best value?
I think the best would be nitrogen gas or steam, because they are like, very clean and it won't affect your biochar properties. No. I said nitrogen gas or steam.
Steam.
Water vapor? Nitrogen gas. Pure nitrogen gas.
So nitrogen gas.
Yeah, that's not really practical for most land
It's
stewardship
expensive, yeah.
applications. So, but again, it comes down to it's configurable based on what's in your local environment, and also what type of cropping system or overall objectives. What is the resource concern that you're looking to address? That's always the first step. And then from there, I do want to take a moment just to point out there's a couple of really useful tools. One is called the Biochar Atlas. There's a sanity tool called the Biochar Calculator. It'll allow you to identify your crops. It'll identify the biochar type that you're utilizing. It'll identify the compost or other amendments. And then that way it can help you make a guidance on what makes sense to apply to my soils based on what my activities are. That is being expanded to a national program. It's currently primarily focused in the Pacific Northwest. It also integrates extremely well into something called the Web Soil Survey, and it allows you to tie your historical reports on your land with what you want to do on the biochar. But let's go ahead and get back to this panel now. And did anybody else have any last minute?
Oh, just wanted to say the author of that Biochar Atlas is here, Kristen Tripp. I already saw her. And just a concern about manure, it's just loaded with seeds. Just a warning, there's lots of seeds that make it through the digestive process, weed seeds in many cases, and you don't want those perhaps in where you're applying your char. So consider that. That might be one vote for a composted material.